Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by my good buddy Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the weekly long-form Kenny and Renny show where we like to do deep dives on people in the industry people we find fascinating. And we've got a fascinating person for you this week. Tara Slone joins us from Hometown Hockey. She'll be here in about 5 minutes or so. Someone I've got to work with numerous times. I was almost kind of like the official Hometown Hockey host a couple of years back, as they just kept putting Jets games back on Hometown Hockey over and over and over again. So Sunday nights were good nights. And that was, I think, 2018, the year that they really went on that run there, was one of the years that it was a hometown hockey heavy schedule. So it was a lot of fun because they were just killing it in those games, and you were really able to see people across the country were getting a real good look at just how good that Winnipeg Jets team is. I honestly do think, Ken, that team at that time, and the national play that it got that year, just really kind of locked in how dangerous this team is, the cores, and how, the potential of it, what it has to be. And that's why I think you get guys like Frank Saravelli at the beginning of this year saying that the Winnipeg Jets were going to go on to win the Stanley Cup. So yeah, it's going to be great to join Tara. I'm sure she'll have a couple thoughts about the Jets, but man, oh man, she's got a million different things she can talk about in her life. Has lived a very interesting life. We can't wait to talk about it. But Ken, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing excellent, Sean. Always great to be together. Had to
It
venture out
is.
for a dentist appointment this morning, and whoa, I played hockey last night. Boy, oh boy, hadn't seen -30 on the old thermometer lately, but holy smokes, we're right in the middle of the heart of the winter. But you love to see it, just battling through it, and good to get outside, good to get some exercise in, and happy to report no cavities. So it was a good start to the day.
Attaboy. I gotta say, I played hockey last night as well, and I had left the gear. I hadn't aired it out. I'd left it in
Oh,
the
oh.
previous game I'd played. It had been a little bit warmer, right? But I left it out and putting the gear on last night. When the skates are frozen to the point that it's kind of hard to get it on your foot, and then you're hoping for like the heat of your foot to thaw it out. Gotta
Poor
say,
life, poor life choices, my man. Poor life choices.
totally, totally. But we were talking. I scored on the very first shift of the game, so it didn't take me long to heat those bad boys up, Ken. I
There
gotta
you
say,
go. There you go. Nicely done. Nicely done.
Ken, I love doing these things. It seems we quite often do these when it's a Jets game day. Just your thoughts quickly on the Jets heading into a very important divisional battle against a team that I have to say I did not see the Nashville Predators having the season that they've had so far. They're a team I lost faith in a couple of years ago, and they were a core that I'd lost faith in. Not that a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden their core really seems to have had a resurgence. What have you seen from them? Because when they were in Winnipeg, I believe the talk in that game was just pointing at that core and saying the periphery of this team seems to be able to get it done, but they're not going to get anywhere as long as their stars aren't their stars.
Yeah, well, Matt Duchene has got news for you, Sean. With speaking of resurgence, 17 goals and 35 points. Also, Ryan Johansson, 11 goals, 31 points. But it's Philip Forsberg. It continues to drive the offense, 19 goals and 30 for him. But one of the guys I wanted to ask Dave Lowry about today and did, Tanner Jeannot. What a
Yeah.
story! 24 points, 12 goals, but 71 pims. Like, he's a classic kind of throwback player. He's one of the few guys we actually noticed in that first game where Nashville was quite poor, I thought, in the game against the Jets. Jeannot was out there running around and hammering people, but also nice hands and tight. He's a nice player. Lowry coached against him in the Western League. Man, oh man, fun to watch. Roman Josi is one of my favorite players to watch in the entire NHL. Like, such an incredibly powerful skater, powerful but fluid. Like, he's so light on his feet, but he has such a powerful stride. That's such an interesting combination when you have defensemen that are so active. He kind of plays that rover role, but he never is out of position defensively. He's one of those few guys that can do it on both ways and gets himself back before getting caught. So they're fun to watch. I'm intrigued by this matchup for sure. Jets, in a lot of ways, played pretty well to open this road trip in Washington, but it's a big opportunity, Sean. They have 6 games in hand on Nashville, but you got to win those don't matter unless you can win the head-to-heads, right? I mean, if you can win the head-to-heads, in those matchups, it can set them up to be in a better place. I mean, seventh in points percentage in the West, but I mean, that only matters if you win those games in hand, and it's hard to win
Right.
all of them, right? So, especially Sean, I mean, what were your thoughts on the schedule that was released? Because boy, oh boy, it looks like it went from a quiet February to a pretty
Yeah.
taxing month, and even just to finish the year, I think it's 40 games in 81 days. I mean, a lot. It's going to be either very easy to get into a rhythm, or there'll be a lot of people kind of gasping for air, if you will.
Yeah, I never know how to take these things. I mean, I guess it's all how you're able to handle them. Sometimes if you clump a whole lot of games together and you can get in a rhythm, then it works for you, right? Because then you're just playing night after night and things seem to be going good. The Jets handled their busiest part of that crazy condensed schedule last year extremely well. It seemed like coming out of that is where they stumbled. So maybe this is a team that's built to be able to handle that. I don't know. I will say this. I think especially leading into when things get a little bit busy, and coming off the break that they had, I thought it was important that they, we talked last week about how important it was for them to get a good start and a good game in against the Detroit Red Wings. They pulled that off. I'm of the opinion that they did a good job stealing that 1 point against Washington. It was
Yep.
important for them to do that. So at this time now, I think it's important, like you said, for them to win some games in hand so that they're kind of in the fray or maybe starting to get
Right.
above the fray of those teams trying to make it. Because I don't think it's a good idea to kind of stumble before things get really busy and then find yourself having to chase the playoff line with a schedule that has the potential to exhaust you. I think that bit makes it that much more, physically exhausting, but also mentally exhausting. So interesting stuff coming up here. We're right in the middle of a fascinating week, I think, just to see the teams that they're playing. I'm a big believer, and I know I said at the beginning of the year, and teams like the LA Kings and the Anaheim Ducks, even the San Jose Sharks, kind of surprised us a little bit because they did better than we thought they would. But I still think the toughest part of the schedule for the Jets is yet to come. If you look at what they're doing now for the end of January through February and into early March, it is a murderer's row of a schedule that they're up against here. What they do I think maybe it's an obvious comment, although the schedule does go into April. I think we're going to have a very good idea of whether or not the Winnipeg Jets are going to be a playoff team or not a playoff team in a month's time from now. Let's move on, though, because our guest is in our virtual green room, ready to go. We are so excited to welcome Tara Slone to the program. It's been great to get you on. We've been trying to get you on for a while. You're another one of the guests that we've been dying to get on, and now it's finally come. It's like time to unwrap the Christmas presents here, Tara. You have got such a fascinating. We like to do deep dives on the research, but you've led such an interesting life. There's so much different stuff to kind of dig into. So I think the first thing we want to dig into is maybe your music career, because I'm a 90s Canadian rock nerd, big time.
All right.
Alan Cross, who's a Winnipegger here, he does the ongoing history of new music. He did a really good couple of podcasts about 90s music in Canada, and kind of made the claim that it was a very unique and interesting time in Canadian music. Do you agree with that? And what was it like being part of that?
It's so hard for me to have any perspective because I was so in the midst of it. I think that there were a lot of bands that got big in Canada at that time. Some of us had careers in the United States, but there were bands like that were just really big here. I Mother Earth, Our Lady Peace, Moist, Big Wreck. And we were kind of, we didn't do as well as those bands, but we were kind of in that fold. I honestly just don't know what the scene looks like now, but I would say, anecdotally, one of the differences between then and now is we were kind of the last wave of big record company money signings. It was just a different era. Radio was king, for lack of a better term. I don't like to gender anything, of course, but radio was like, that's how you gained access to people's ears. And so there was just a lot of money being thrown around. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous in retrospect, the amount of dollars that were spent on tour support and videos and albums. But we were lucky to kind of ride that until, I'm not sure what exactly killed that era, but I think it was, the dawn of digital and Napster and all that stuff. And then everything just shifted. So, but I don't know what the climate looks like now, but I do think that it was just a time where there was a lot of Canadian music being made, and there was a great community, especially in the rock world.
What, Tara, what drew you to music initially? I read that you initially got into it at more of the classically trained voice, and we're looking at opera. How does someone go from opera to rock, I guess, if you will?
I mean, opera was just the kind of music that I felt I could sing. I loved all music. I grew up in a pretty musical family. My dad is a lawyer slash rock and roller. He's been in bands since he was a teenager, and he has a studio in his house. So, music has just been part of my life, and that included a love for classical music. And I joined choirs and just found that I had that type of voice as a child, teenager, and so that kind of, I had a talent there, and I studied pretty seriously through high school. But I also worked at Sam the Record Man through high school. So I had a lot of exposure to really cool, alternative artists, and had a bit more, a bit more exposure than you would just listening to Q104 as it is in what's the one in Toronto? Q104 is in Halifax, or C100. So I just feel like I had, in my real, my studies, but also elsewhere, I had a lot of exposure.
You had talked about not wanting to get into, or never wanting to assign a gender to something like that with your King comments. I was interested in this because, I think of female rockers in those days. Biff Naked comes to mind, another Winnipeg gal. Holly McNarland was phenomenal back then. What was it like? How welcoming was the Canadian music rock industry at that time for women? Because there was, I went to tons of concerts, and I heard there was all the, kind of toxic masculinity. A lot of these concerts, saying that women didn't know how to rock the way men did. And, I had friends who would say they would tune out rock bands that had women in them. And then you started seeing, representation in some of the bigger bands down in the States. With Butterfly Wings, we're talking about a band that Scott Hole was so good. What was that? How welcoming was the Canadian scene to women back in those days?
Not very. I think it was all the same. It was the same across North America. I mean, there was a bit of an idea back then that, first of all, as a Canadian band, it was easier, or you would gain more success in Canada if you went south of the border, had some success there, and came back. That was certainly the case for us. We tried to get a Canadian record deal, and we couldn't. And then, we showcased for a lot of record companies south of the border, and ended up signing with Tommy Boy, which was at the time the biggest independent label in the United States. But getting a song played on radio, on rock radio, as a woman, it was the same in Canada as it was in the US. It was really hard. And we would hear things like, we're not playing any women right now on the station, or we've already got one or two in rotation, so we can't add another one right now. So it was just that added, it's already hard to get a song on the radio, no matter how good it is. But it was that added thing where it's just like, what? So, those names you mentioned, like, I think there's that extra layer that they had to break through. So the fact that somebody like Biff or Holly achieved that kind of success says a lot.
We always like to talk about preparation when it comes to our real jobs, but I'm curious for the preparation side of, getting ready for a show and that exhilarating element of when you come onto the stage and the crowd and everything else. But what's your preparation like in terms of getting ready for a performance?
I think there's a lot of hype involved, like, especially if you're in a, backstage area or on a tour bus. I think music always helps musicians get ready. The drummer always has their drumsticks in their hand and they're beating on, their lap or whatever. I think I was really lucky because of my vocal training history. I would actually do warm-ups, and I would do a lot of vocal warm-ups that were culled from my classical days and from my theater school days. So I never missed a show. I think there are probably times where I had colds that were so bad I probably should have missed shows, but I think the fact that my voice didn't cack out at any point is a testament to actually doing a little bit of a warm up and maybe a glass of wine. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, not too much though. I never liked to hit the stage feeling actually inebriated. Just one.
Yeah, you'd hear the stories sometimes about rock bands. I don't understand how they did it. I don't understand how musicians played their instruments at the level they did, intoxicated as they were. But
Autopilot, just muscle memory. That's it.
I guess so. We're going to get into this a little bit more. I kind of want to, follow the timeline of your career. You're definitely a person who likes to use the microphone or your voice to lead to change. I wonder, I went back a little bit through your Joy Drop playlist. I take a look at a song like Beautiful, which was one of your big songs. It seems to me to be a critique of beautiful culture and what it maybe gets away with or how it treats people. I'm interested in your thoughts back then in your career on how you wanted to use your music to potentially shape the world around you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you're a young band, like the platform was different, right? Social media wasn't a thing. So it was through your music, through your concerts. But I always found like the first obstacle we would hit was the record company. And it's really hard when you're like, you're a new band and you just don't feel like you wield a lot of power. So I remember, certain things like, I'm not even sure I've told this story. I didn't want Tommy Lee to be in our music video for the song Sometimes Want to Die. Tommy had a spotty history and having been accused and incarcerated for spousal abuse. And I didn't want to do it. And I got shut down by the record company. And that's one of those things where maybe in retrospect, some might say you should have walked. I mean, and I will go on to say that I ended up liking Tommy. I liked him very much as a person, recognizing his history. But I didn't have much of a platform. And maybe that's why now that I have one, I use it differently. And I'm able, because I'm able to be louder. Maybe I have a little bit less of a filter because I'm older and I don't know that I have less to lose. But yeah, I mean, Sportsnet can always take offense at what I say. But it was hard. But for sure, the music was our message at that time. And Beautiful is a song written by Tony Ravelau, who's the drummer for Joy Drop. And that was the first song they played me when I met with them to see if we were a good fit. And I thought, well, this says everything that I feel in my heart.
Because you mentioned Tommy Lee, I have to confess and say Motley Crue and Tesla was my first concert. Tara, what was yours?
My first concert was Paul Young. So that's dating me already. I think I was 11. It was Paul Young at Massey Hall in Toronto with my dad. So Every Time You Go Away, for those who know the song.
That's good stuff. So I saw that you toured quite a bit in the States. You talked about being in a video or having Tommy Lee be in your video, or one of the biggest stars throughout the 80s. Who would you say is the person that was most interesting to you, that was brought into your orbit from your music career, that you got to meet, understand, spend time with?
Wow. That's I wish I'd had time to think about that question, because I'm sure I'm going to say something and then I'll be like, oh, damn.
You can if it percolates and comes up later in the show, you can say, and there was this person. But yeah, what do you have right off the top of your head?
Wow. I mean, there were so many bands that we played with that were just kind of like pinch me moments, right? Like that was just kind of, you do these festival shows and you're like, we're on the same bill as Nine Inch Nails. We're on the same bill as Men at
Yeah.
Work. Like none of this computes. None of this makes sense. But I'm gonna give a name that I've mentioned him before, and this guy Jordan Zadarozny, I think came into my world through music, through Joy Drop, and it was post Joy Drop. But Jordan Zadarozny ended up producing my solo album. But I think he's one of the most talented musicians out there. He's from Pembroke, Ontario. He has a band called Blinker the Star, and his album August Everywhere. I may be being a little bit obscure for viewers, but his album August Everywhere, which was a big release in the United States, was kind of our soundtrack for a couple of our tours. You know, he was a musician's musician who inspired musicians. And so I ended up running into him just as Joy Drop was ending at a Queens of the Stone Age concert in Toronto. And it was like there and then we decided to work together. And so I would say, you know, that probably had the most impact in terms of somebody that I'd run into. But gosh, I feel like maybe our first producer, I'll say Ron St. Germain. And again, this is obscure only for real music nerds who kind of follow the production end. But I think he was a legendary producer, one of the last of the splicing tape guys. That album was made, totally on reel to reel, and we recorded at an old farmhouse in Massachusetts, and so that was one of the people that I think we were really blessed to encounter.
Theater was also a part of your life too, Tara. I mean, what did you enjoy about that aspect, and what drew you to that part of part of life as well?
Well, clearly I need attention because everything I do is like, look at me, listen to me. I mean, theater is just a blast. Quite frankly, I didn't know what to do post opera. I started my degree in music at Dalhousie University, and it was just clear that I did not have the discipline to do opera. I mean, it's one of the hardest in the world, and certainly to attain, any level of competence, you just have to really devote yourself. And I was 18 at Dalhousie University, and it's just like watching all my friends do Frosh Week. So I was looking for, something that matched obviously my desire to perform and to learn and to enter into some craft. And music's part of it too. So I ended up doing theater at Concordia, and yeah, I think it's the same thing. I think all of it is storytelling in a way, and all of it is sort of emoting and performing, and there's a lot of, introspection as well. So none of it's very different. It seems like there's like a weird jagged line that goes from like opera to what I do now, but in a way, they're all very, very much related. They're definitely in the same kind of family.
So watching your theater career, you move into television and movies, and I've taken a look at your IMDb page, and I see movies like Foolproof, Demons 3, La Femme Nikita, Psychopath. I'm interested in what it was about the thriller / horror genre that really seemed to suck you in.
Well, I mean, honestly, when you're just auditioning for stuff, you just take what you get. And I guess I fit into that. Yeah, the very first movie I did was called Night of the Demons 3 or Demons 3. And it was bad. But it was a movie. It was, for me, I was like 21, and it was 3 straight weeks of shooting. It was like enough money for a year. And yeah, I mean, I don't really recommend anybody go and check that one out, but I got my feet wet in the genre, that's for sure.
So interesting. One of the things I noticed, Tara, we were sort of semi-colleagues when I was working, Sun, you were part of the Sun TV. I was on the print side, and I can remember, in our building, how we were kind of wondering, in some ways it sunk the newspaper side, but I was curious, what was it like to be on the other side, being part of the launch and being part of the network, for that period of time when you were there?
Well, I was there. So I wasn't part of Sun News Network. I was part of Sun TV. So it
Oh,
was a
sorry.
little,
Yes.
yeah. So it was different. It was really just a placeholder. So I don't really know the story, but I think that Sun Media was just trying to figure out what to do with the station, which they had, they owned this property. And so actually, they had, because of the CRTC, they had to have some programming. So I was part of a show called Canoe Live, which was an entertainment. I did an entertainment segment on that show, and I was part of something called Inside Jam, which was an entertainment program. And then they had a show called The Grill Room, which was a sports show. But everything else was like, they'd play reruns of Taxi and like Super Dave Osborne and really weird movies from the 80s. So it was a kind of a strange station. And then I never ended up working for Sun News Network. I'm not sure. I don't think they would have had me, and I'm not sure I would have done it.
Yeah.
It would not have made a lot of sense. But I was actually on mat leave when that whole thing happened.
Okay.
And then I ended up getting a job at BT Calgary. So
I was gonna say that would have been looked like a massive misfit.
yeah, I think we would have just said no.
I'm kind of asking this, and it's going to slice through, the beginning of your career to the end. But do you see a consistent thread between theater, acting, music, what you do now, live television, like you did in Calgary? Is there a consistent thread or a skill that you feel that you had that you leaned on, or is there something that you learned from each that kind of colored the next chapter?
Oh my gosh! I mean, I feel like I learn every show. I mean, I never feel like I've done something right. I never feel like I've done something perfectly. I never feel like it's really hard for me to be like, that was a great show for me. So, I mean, part of that I acknowledge is me as a bit of a perfectionist, but I do think that there's just something to learn all the time. I think for me, interviewing is the biggest, it's a gift, but it's a challenge constantly, because I think we all are always learning how to create a space where somebody feels comfortable. I mean, comfortable enough to tell their story. Sometimes that's an uncomfortable conversation. So I'm not saying you're sort of, it doesn't have to be all kind of soft and cuddly, but you want to create this sort of container where somebody can be themselves. And so, I think that's a constant dance. So there's never a feeling like I've achieved it. But for sure, I think each chapter, I take something from it, and it leads to the next. I mean, I think, I have a level of comfort with a live audience that I think can only be gained from, doing hundreds of live performances. I have a comfort with live TV. I think that can only really be gained from doing hours and hours of a show like breakfast television. And a comfort, I think, with things going wrong. That also is like, I really attribute that to just 3.5 hours of live TV every morning, knowing that, a light's going to fall behind you, or somebody's going to walk through the shot, or somebody's going to show up drunk, or, like some just weird stuff's going to happen, or you just, you're off the air, or the mic's not working, or whatever. So I think, all of these things really help, but it's a journey, as I'm sure both of you recognize. It's it's hard. Like it's work always, but it's a joy too.
Yeah, art of the interview is so interesting. I've read a few stories, Tara, that mention your curiosity. So A, I'm curious where curious nature comes from, and B, what role it's played in the art of the interview and making interviews better.
I don't know where it comes from. I'm curious about that. Yeah, I mean, I think just sort of a fascination with life, like, and I think that is something that served me on a show like breakfast television, because you go from a gardening segment to a comedy segment to a movie, it's all kinds of things. I don't know. I just, I find the world fascinating. I'm not stuck on one particular thing. Um, so, sort of a genre hopper. But I do think it's critical in, I see it so much in Ron and his, why and he has it more than me, I think, why he is able to stay so engaged. Like he is truly an engaged person. We go for a tour of since we've mentioned Pembroke, like the arena in Pembroke, and he's talking to everyone. I got to tear him away. He's eating everything up. And I really think that you cannot be interesting unless you're interested. And so, and it's just about listening. I think if you're listening, then you will learn so much. It's the only way.
I'm listening to a bunch of the stuff you're saying here, and there's a million different places I want to take that last one. I'm going to back up and rewind it just a little bit and focus on the breakfast television in Calgary, because that's kind of where you started. I always found that a little bit fascinating that you took that position. It does make sense that people in music or in acting, in Canada, make a move into the media like that. Usually, though, it seems to happen in Toronto unless that person is returning home. So I had always assumed before I got to know you that you were a Western girl and that you were from that area there. So I'm interested for you in what made that the right move for you at the time to head to Calgary, an area of the country I don't think you were unfamiliar with, but it definitely wouldn't have been home.
No, and I would say I was fairly unfamiliar with it. I mean, I had toured through Calgary, but that's about it. I mean, the first thing is that I knew that an opportunity like that to be a co-host on that kind of show, that was like a really rare opportunity. And it certainly wasn't going to happen in Toronto right away. That's not the role you step into, having just done a couple of years on a little network. So I knew that it was the opportunity of a lifetime, and it was the stepping stone that I was going to need. My ex-husband, he's from St. Albert, Alberta. He went to Mount Royal University, so he knew Calgary really well. So I think those two things combined, and at the time, actually, my brother was at the University of Calgary. So I had like just a little kind of, couple touchstones of comfort. But I mean, in retrospect, I'm not, I don't know what they were doing hiring me, to tell you the truth, because a morning show is all about connecting with local community. And I mean, I had to learn really quickly, but I didn't know anything about Calgary. I remember when you have shots going to break of traffic, and I didn't know what the Deerfoot was. I had no clue. So, the stuff like that comes at you fast and hard. But I am, as hard as it was, 3 a.m. wake ups, etc. I am so grateful for that opportunity.
How'd you get through that part of it? I only did a couple fill-in shifts when morning show radio was here, but it was easy to do one as a one-off. But how did you get into the routine, and were you one of the people that could nap in the afternoon if you had to be up at that ridiculous hour of the day?
Had to nap. Yeah, I will say that I don't think I'm cut out for that. I have kind of these like moments where I think, could I do that again? And I don't think that I could. I have great admiration for people who can continue that for 20 years. I was perpetually tired. I just, I did it because I had to do it. I was fine in the morning, actually. My alarm went off at 3. You never press snooze, ever. Mm-hmm. You just do it, right? You're a robot. And the show was fun. The show was a lot of fun. So it wasn't hard to get through the show, but I was a zombie a couple times a day, leading up to the nap and then leading up to bedtime. But what ended up happening for me is it never got easier, and in fact, it just ended up getting harder. And my last year there, I was starting to do hometown hockey, so I did, I think, 15 of the 25 stops, and that just screwed me right up. So I was starting to have real insomnia. And the real wake up call came for me. We had an underground parkade, and there was nobody in it. I would park there at 4:55, or sorry, 3:55. And I like shaved off the side of my car on a pillar in an empty underground parkade. Like that's how I was literally impaired from fatigue. And that's when I said to myself, I can't continue. And luckily, hometown hockey, you know, took off and I was invited to be part of it full time. So I didn't have to make any hard decisions or look for anything. It came to me. But yeah, it's not rock and roll o'clock as I like to say. Not at all.
So, born in Montreal, raised in Nova Scotia, spent a lot of time in Toronto, and then you have this hunk of your life in Calgary, which is, it's Calgary's got its own kind of social agenda. Give me an idea for you as a person who's been across Canada. And we're Westerners and we love to feel like we've got an identity, and I'm sure Easterners do as well. Give me your take on Canadiana and the difference between Easterners and Westerners.
Oh my gosh. That's like just designed to get me in trouble.
Not in our market.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll preface the whole thing by saying that Alberta surprised me. I think that it's funny because my ex would always make kind of cracks about the focus on the Toronto Maple Leafs and referring to newspapers like the Toronto Globe and Mail. And I kind of saw that chip on his shoulder, but I started to understand it more when I moved to Alberta, because it's not, I mean, there are parts like, there's oil and gas and there's, there are parts of the stereotype that are true, I think. But it's so much more than that. And there are parts of the stereotype that are just endearing as hell. But there's a lot more culture to Alberta, and refinement than a lot of people give it credit for. But for sure, Alberta is its own place. And I understand why it can, the West can really start to feel cut off from what they call the center of the country. But I think the thing is, everybody feels like they have their own identity, and they do in a way. And then that is a similarity, right? So, but I don't want to necessarily point out the differences. I don't want to say like Westerners are this and Easterners are that, but this is a really big country, and I think people really take pride in where they're from, and that's the same everywhere you go.
My curiosity takes me in a lot of interesting places too, and just with the passing of John Madden, I reread Peter King's column about traveling across the country with him in the cruiser, and I kind of wondered if in your course of touring, I know it's a different scene obviously, but what that meant for you and what it meant to maybe see the different parts of the country through the touring lens, I guess.
Well, I mean, there's the touring with the band, and then there's the touring that I've done with hometown hockey. Touring with a band, probably contrary to what most people would think, is you don't actually end up seeing a whole lot.
True.
So, I could have been through Calgary 5 times, but you don't get to experience so much of Calgary. With hometown hockey, it's such a privilege, right? I mean, it's so, we're there to showcase these communities in a positive light. So, we're just welcomed in a way that's like so humbling. This country is so magical and beautiful from a physical perspective, geographically, just stunning. What I feel really lucky about, and obviously, hometown hockey is a very, we try to be representative and inclusive, and we try to tell hard stories. But it also really highlights just the kindness and goodness of people. And during hard times and times where I felt fatigued and low, that's always what's gotten me through and lifted me up. So I'm very grateful to be part of a show that has that element, kind of that area of focus.
I think one of the things that makes you a fascinating person is the way that you handle social media. And I think because we're in media, learning how to navigate these things, it's constantly evolving. I think we're all asking the same questions. I've been on calls before, seeing some of the stuff that you've handled. So I want to get into this. I'm going to get into this in what I think is a really positive spot. You've mentioned your ex-husband a couple times,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that from following you, you'll a lot of times show some of the co-parenting strategies that you've employed, and kind of give a peek behind the curtains at your relationship with your ex and how you've navigated the two of you not being together anymore. Now, for some people, that would be intensely private, and I'm sure there's parts of it that are intensely private for you. But what about that, or what about you, makes it important to put those examples that clearly you see as positive examples out into the world for others to see?
Well, I probably wouldn't be shining a light on it if it was going badly. But I think we're just in a really fortunate situation. I'm a product of divorced parents. It's so hard, and it's so hard, splitting up, and it's so hard on our family, no matter how amicable it is. Um, but I also know that we're in a situation where we can co-parent, and there's a lot of sanity and working together. And I don't know if my daughter recognizes it now, but I hope that she does down the road. And I know, from observing other families, it can go a lot less smoothly. So I don't know. I think my perspective is always, clearly I'm a sharer. And I know that it helps me selfishly to talk and express myself, but it helps me to hear other people's stories too. I'm a communicator. And so, whether it's that or just talking about, times where my mental health is poor or has been, or, just things like, I think I've never seen vulnerability as weakness. And so I think it can be of benefit sometimes. So I guess that's why.
Hmm.
How about you? How about finding the work-life balance, right, between the parenting and the job and the juggling life in general? Tara, what are some of the things do you do to find that balance?
It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. I mean, I think it's such a, yeah, like that. It's just such a fallacy. I mean, the pandemic has been very hard. I mean, that has been, that's just a whole different, you know, being at home and trying to work, and my daughter's trying to do school. And, I don't think anybody's coping mechanisms are intact. So, I will say that I've been super fortunate that my ex, I'll just call him Joe so now everybody knows Joe, has been he's been willing to take on, my tough schedule and fill in the gaps. So that's the only way. What I struggle with, and I think where I would be better at the work-life balance thing, is like leaving, not answering emails 24/7. Like, I don't have great boundaries. And so that's something that's a work in progress for me. I'm starting to learn just out of necessity. But we don't work 9 to 5. We're always working, right? And if an idea is thrown out there or a story needs to be addressed, I tend to address it and not let things sit. And that, if I could offer any advice that I have not myself taken, that would be it. Boundaries.
I want to go back to the social media stuff. There's someone told me a long time ago, and there's a lot of people in our industry who approach it like this: don't feed the trolls. I'm a person who very much follows that. I don't see a lot of point in engaging with people who are clearly there to either stir the pot or just bring negativity to your doorstep. I've always handled it like this. There's a lot of people in my life that I've been friends with at times who you started feeling that they were bringing more negativity into your life than positivity. So I'd shut that out and compartmentalize that and move on with the people that brought in positivity. So there was a point a couple of years into this media gig, and I just started feeling all this negativity brought to my doorstep, and So that's one way I like to handle this. And I think people, if they're watching this, if they see me on social media, I'm the kind of guy who just,
Mhm.
someone throws something at me, I don't touch it. You are the opposite. You go after the trolls, you engage the trolls, you take the trolls down. I can only imagine that, you're talking about the work-life balance. I don't know if you would count that as part of your work, but it's got to be
For sure.
consuming of your energy. Why is it important for you to go after people online? What are you trying to achieve in doing that?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And I think for sure, sometimes I would be much better served just, clicking block and being done with it. At the same time, I think it's, I rarely engage in back and forths. I think, nobody changed their mind based on a Twitter exchange or a Facebook exchange. So I know that I'm not trying to um, change anybody's perspective that way. I think it's really important, especially as a woman, though, to show the world like what we're subjected to. Because if we don't point it out, nobody will ever know. And I think I tend to um, highlight or retweet kind of some of the most extreme examples, and oftentimes I'll get reactions like, somebody actually said this, somebody
Hmm.
actually wrote this, because most people don't get that. But I think it's really important to share that and say, like, this is the world that we're living in, and whether we invite that or not, and we mostly do not, um I shouldn't have a comment about making a sandwich over the kitchen sink, or getting a dick pic because I talked about women's hockey. Like, that's not a I'm not provoking anything. Sometimes I'll be deliberately provocative and I'll talk about, people's reaction to how I talk about women's sports, but most of the time, this is really unsolicited disgustingness. So I think it's important for people to know what we're getting.
Yeah, it's just not okay, right? A lot of the stuff that people have to deal with, especially on Twitter. I mean, there are some endearing qualities to it as well, but man, oh man, that people think that they are, oh, it's okay to say some of those things, to me is absurd. Uh, Tara, when it comes to top of her game, I mean, what's it been like to sort of see the growth and to be able to shine that kind of a light on incredible people and on the people that are excelling, especially in women's sports in a lot of those cases?
Well, right now we're trying to figure out what the sort of next incarnation of that show slash brand slash whatever it is going to look like. Um, and I'm glad that Sportsnet decided that it was time to have a little bit of focus on women's sports. It's not enough. It's not enough anywhere. It's not enough that there's not a you know really viable women's league in hockey. It's not enough that there's not a viable soccer league for women in Canada. Like, there's a lot of it's not enough. But unless we start sharing these stories and including women in the conversation, including, WNBA highlights in the packages on Sportsnet Central, stuff like that, if people don't see it, they literally don't know it's there. And unfortunately, they're not necessarily top of mind, so it can't be just every 4 years where we're talking about the performance of a team or an athlete at the Olympics. It has to be all the time. It's really easy just to, here we are, we're NHL rights holders, we're, part owners of the Toronto Blue Jays. Like, it's really easy to fill up your programming with men's sports, because there's more than enough to fill it up. But you have to, at this point, be intentional about, you know hearing the women's stories, and there's so much to talk about. So I'm gonna keep pushing that agenda forward.
Tara, I hope we're not making this too heavy of an interview, but you're a person who piles so much on your shoulders and you carry so much weight. And I think one of the things that you are a leader in our industry at is kind of marrying sports and the fun of sports and the lightness that sports can be, but also bringing in significant issues that need to be talked about. I'm interested in your philosophy on marrying those two because you've done it so well over the years.
I don't think I have a philosophy other than I know that some people want the politics out of sports, but that people are not going to like what I'm saying here. But that's just an inherently privileged position. Like, in fact, you can't want to talk about women's sports and it not be political because women's sports are politicized. Just trying to get a women's sport on TV is that difficult. So for me, there isn't separation. There is not. There's no schism there. I can't personally make the decision to like leave politics out of sports because those are the stories that are certainly resonating with me. Just is that way.
We talk about inclusion all the time. It's a hot button topic, but it's nice to hear that Jennifer Botterill, our colleague, is in the mix for some of at least in discussions. Now today we hear Rachel Dory potentially with the Vancouver Canucks. What's going to take for a team to either hire a woman as a GM or an AGM where they get a prominent role in management or a more prominent role in the NHL?
Well, it's just, yeah, I'm getting pretty tired of hearing somebody's, in the running and then of course it just doesn't happen. It's going to take one. That is my prediction. It's going to take one, and then I'm not sure it's going to be a waterfall, but I think it's going to, I suspect that it's safer for somebody to hire somebody tried and true. That's why the coaching carousel looks the way it does. And typically the executive carousel is similar. And I suspect that organizations don't want to take the bullet of yes, they do have to give a woman a chance who hasn't been in that position before, because no women have really been in that position before. But certainly, men have been hired who are a little outside. So they just have to be willing to take a couple bullets for a minute. And then it'll be fine. And then more can do the same. Listen, I hope it's the Canucks that just break the ice. I really do. I hope we're not hearing these names, just for effect.
Just to keep people satisfied and feel that it's progress is being made. Yeah. I can hear the pride in your voice when you talk about hometown hockey, and it's well-earned, phenomenal program. To you, what is the importance of hometown hockey and the way it tries to reach Canadians?
I think no matter who you are, whether you're a huge hockey star, I think Shane Doan's in my head because he's involved with the Olympic team. But whether you're Shane Doan or whether you're a 7-year-old or whether you work in a bank, it doesn't matter. And that's what we're talking about with no matter where you're from in Canada, everybody is proud of where they've come from and their community. And that's actually a unifying element, even though we're all so different. It's like this quilt. So we are just remarkably, blessed to come into these communities and have the red carpet rolled out, because people want us to be there and to be entrusted with people's stories. I think is just, I feel so lucky. I think we've held different levels of importance at different times. But for me, it's certainly post-COVID, the few stops that we managed to get in there before we got pulled off the road again, that felt really amazing because it just represented a sense of normalcy and we've all been so isolated. So, but no matter whether it's pre or post-COVID, I think coming together to celebrate is just a lovely thing.
Tara, you touched on the women's game as well. There was an infusion of cash. What's it going to be like to, do you see a time where the NHL commits to the synergy and there being for lack of a better term, WNHL, like what we've seen with the NBA and the WNBA sort of partnership?
I don't know if it's going to be the NHL at this point. I honestly don't have any insider information. It's probably better that I don't because I would have to try to hide something. Um, but my understanding is that the NHL was waiting for at the time, the NWHL and the PWHPA to come, to some agreement. They didn't want to get in the middle of that. But that to me just seems like, yeah, I'm just not sure the level of commitment is there. And then you have to wonder, given the economics of the last 2 years and where their focus is. So, I see that there are efforts to try to grow the game in a different, more grassroots way. But I'm not hearing rumblings at any point now that the NHL is going to step in. I could be totally wrong. Like, this is really me guessing. But I feel like what's starting to happen is, the PHF. It just, there are investors that are starting to grow that league. It's a small salary cap, but they increased their salary cap from 300,000 per team to 750,000 per team. Now they're going to start giving their players, some kind of percentage of shares in the markets, etc. So I'm not sure it's going to be the NHL. I think it's going to be sponsorship. I think it's going to be, the Secret Deodorant sponsoring the PWHPA's Dream Gap Tour. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was just some investment that happened elsewhere. I would love to see the NHL step in because, the NBA and WNBA model is a good one, but I'm not seeing anybody too eager to hop on that right now.
Tori, you brought up Ron MacLean earlier on. We've had him on this show, and you do not walk away from an interaction with Ron without being impressed. I've also said this before. Ron's got this way of like reaching out to everyone he meets personally, and I don't think you have an interaction with Ron MacLean where you don't walk away with a smile on your face, feeling better about yourself somehow. So I've always thought he's the perfect guy to be on hometown hockey and going into the community and meeting people. For you, what's it been like learning from him? What are some of the things you've picked up from him? And I'm also very interested in the idea that you getting a louder and louder voice and pushing for the things that you want to, how he's been supportive of you through all that.
Well, he is a generous broadcaster. He's a generous co-host. I think everything he does is really in service of the story. It's not in service of himself. So there's nothing proprietary about him. When I always felt from the very beginning, I mean, he had more faith in me than I did. He wanted me, I always laugh when he calls me an equal. I mean, because I'm not, because like he's been there for, he has a unique skill set, a unique ability, and he's been doing it for so much longer than I have. But I think he sees it that way. There's no like, this is my question that I'm going to ask, and this is my area of discussion. This is my story. None of that. It's really in service of the story and the community. And sometimes he'll be like, he'll have this list of names from like, the minor hockey community and wherever we are. And I'll kind of be like, why are you doing that? Like, I'll say inside my head, like, Canada doesn't know who those people are. Like, you don't need to be that specific. But then like, we'll hear like how much it actually meant to that community. Like, oh my gosh, you mentioned my grandfather, like, oh my gosh. So I really think this is not a selfish endeavor for him. This is really about bringing joy to people. In terms of what he's taught me, I mean, a lot of what he possesses can't be learned. Like, I don't have a photographic memory. I don't have the ability to tie every single story up with a little bow, like no matter where it goes. But, I certainly, I mean, I just learn by watching him, and I'm I'm probably a little punnier than I used to be. Um, he's very precise. Like, he's very insistent upon, when we're watching visuals for a story, he'll say like, well, that arena is empty. Like, we don't want people to see that. Change the shot. So he's very precise about, how he wants to see things conveyed, and he's often right. So yeah, he's a very skilled storyteller and an excellent broadcaster. But then there's also the ease, the ease and the storytelling, and so he's been an incredible mentor to me.
Awesome, Tara. You mentioned the word investment, and we're very appreciative of the investment you made with us and our viewers and listeners. This was just an absolutely fantastic conversation that we've been looking forward to for a long time, and the insight you provided was exceptional, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you for having me. It means a lot.
I did want to say this, Tara. For me, the most important question I felt I was asking you was about how you handle the trolls, because I mean, I've been on calls where you've addressed with the rest of us at Sportsnet how you've handled certain situations and when you've been attacked. And I'll say this, I already had kind of a preconceived idea of why you respond the way that you do, but I will say this. I've learned from you firing back at people. I've learned about some of the the terrible things that yourself and other women and other minorities go through on social media. And the one thing that I've always come away with is when I do see you battling on social media, it doesn't feel like you're battling for yourself. It feels like you're battling for a lot of people. I think that's courageous to do. I think you're one of the most courageous people in Canadian media right now. And I think a lot of people have benefited from that courage. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for joining us. This was an absolute joy. We stole a lot of your day, but we do really appreciate your time, and so too does our audience.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, another
Awesome.
home run. I think that was phenomenal. I'll peek a little bit into that, the conversation I was just having there. There's been some times where we've been called onto calls where a lot of the people, the writers, the broadcasters across Sportsnet have been on calls to kind of address some of the terrible comments that are made towards our employer looks in and they're interested in our mental health, and one of the things they want to allow us to do is to handle some of the social media, some of the hate that's thrown your way. And Tara behind the scenes is really a person who takes more heat than anyone, and stands up there and tells us that she feels that heat, but at the same time is always there to kind of stand up and fight. And we have learned a lot, all of us at Sportsnet, from the way that she's handled these situations. I truly do think Tara Slone is about as strong as it gets in media, in handling social media. So phenomenal stuff. Your takeaways,
Awesome.
Ken, before we head out?
Just tremendous. She's, again, I'd never met Tara. We had a couple exchanges on Twitter, and I always found her to be really interesting and insightful, and she was that and then some. Our guests were fortunate to have access to her for an hour at a time, and we look forward to talking to her in person again sometime down the road, because she's just a fascinating individual who's lived such an interesting life, and that curiosity is something that I think anyone can connect with. I think it's just fabulous. It's a fabulous quality, and it's great that she shares that curiosity with her viewers.
No doubt. And I do have to say this, love this comment from Joe from Winnipeg. He says there's not much hate in the K&R chat room. I have to say, I agree with you 100%. We are always blown away with how respectful our chat room is. Never mind respectful, how big a part you are of the show, how much you build the show. I've said it once, I'll say it again. You are the Kenny and Renny show. You're the secret ingredients. So thank you so much for joining us here on this day. We hope you enjoyed the Tara Slone episode. We will see you tonight after the Jets take on the Nashville Predators for the post-game Kenny and Renny show. We are looking forward to it. Until then, have a great day, everybody.